Hey guys, welcome back. This time around we want to take a look at conduction dynamics. And particularly we want to take a look at four main topics. We want to look at propagation. We also want to take a look at refractory periods and see what kind of influence the refractory periods have on potential propagation. We want to take a look at the conduction velocity that can occur down an axon. And we want to finally take a look at the different types of axons that we have. Let's start with propagation. If an action potential is to serve as the neuron signaling device, propagation must occur. And propagation is the conversion of a localized depolarization event into a wave of depolarization along the entire length of the axon. An action potential is self-propagating, if you recall. It's a positive feedback mechanism that is at play here of opening and closing of sodium and potassium gates. Now this is going to be a unidirectional event because it's going to typically start at the axon hillock and go to the axonal terminal. And we are talking about the electrical events that are being conducted down an unmyelinated neuron. Now these events follow a principle known as the all or none principle. This principle states that for an action potential to be realized, the preset threshold depolarization must be met within a limited time at the axonal hillock. That means if it's not met within that limited time, we have the none. If met, the impulse travels the entire length of the axon, maintaining the same intensity. Now, one impulse is the same as another impulse. The intensity and strength do not differ. So how does the brain recognize the different stimuli and determine appropriate responses? The central nervous system depends on the number of impulses per amount of time and not the intensity of a single stimulus to integrate the message. Thus, the greater the stimulus generated by the summing of the graded potentials at the axonal hillock, the greater the frequency of the impulses. Now, from this image, you can see three different graded potentials being played out in the bottom. Notice the first one, the graded potential did not reach threshold during a given amount of time. And notice that we did not have an action potential. The second one did reach threshold and surpassed it slightly, and notice it did result in several action potentials. But notice the third one was a stronger, more intense graded potential. It summed up at the axonal hillock and resulted in an increase in the action potentials being conducted down the axon. Now recall that during the time when the events of depolarization and repolarization are occurring, the neuron is incapable of responding to another stimulus unless some level of resting membrane potential is reacquired. This period, the refractory period, keeps each action potential separate. Stronger stimuli, as we just mentioned, can increase the frequency by activating the sodium gates immediately after the resting state is reestablished past threshold repolarization levels. See that played out here in sort of the cream colored highlighted area. This period is called absolute refractory period. During absolute refractory period, these depolarization events, sodium gates opening, are played out, and repolarization, the potassium gates are open, are attempting to reestablish resting membrane potential up to threshold levels, up to that negative 55 millivolt charge. Once absolute refractory period is realized, a second stimulus can sum at the axonal hillock and result in second action potential. This can continue as long as the absolute refractory period is realized and ion concentration gradients permit simple diffusion. But remember though, each time we have depolarization and repolarization, we have an opening and closing of sodium and potassium gates. And that sodium and potassium moves across the membrane based upon simple diffusion. If we don't allow those neurons to reestablish ion concentrations at some point, then when we open those channels, the ions typically will not move in their common direction. To reestablish resting membrane potential completely, though, we have to reach a level known as relative refractory period. This is the time it takes to repolarize and reestablish ion concentrations utilizing the ATP sodium-potassium pump. Next thing on our list is conduction velocity. And when we're talking about these electrical events being conducted down the axon, we're talking about conduction velocity. Conduction velocity of axons depends on two factors. One of those factors is the axon diameter. The greater the diameter of the axon, the faster the action potential will be conducted. Second thing is going to be the myelin sheath. If present, the myelin acts as an insulator, with an action potential skipping over the length of the myelin sheath. The axon will go through depolarization only at the nodes of Revere. Note that the concentration of channels are greater within the nodes. This type of conduction is called saltatory conduction, and it's a leaping event or skipping along the axon. It is much quicker, much faster, and keeps the impulse better focused. It also helps that the nodes of Ravier, the sodium gates, are much more excitable. This is not to say that the ion channels are present only on the nodes of Ravier in myelinated neurons. It is that the myelin sheath allows limited depolarization at the nodes, and thus the impulse can travel 30 plus times quicker on the myelinated axons. We can appreciate the benefits if we consider someone who has an autoimmune disorder called multiple sclerosis. In these individuals, the myelin sheath of the central nervous system axons are digested, causing the action potential to materialize by depolarization along the entire length of the axon instead of just at the nodes of Ravier. And finally, let's take a look at the types of nerve fibers that we can have. Nerve fibers may be classified as group A, B, or C fibers based on their diameter, degree of myelination, and speed of conduction. Group A fibers are typically somatic, sensory, and motor fibers servicing the skin, skeletal muscles, and joints. They have the largest diameter, thicker myelin sheaths, and conduction speeds of 15 to 150 meters per second. Meters per second. That's about 450 feet per second. The group B fibers would include autonomic motor neurons and sensory axons, as well as some smaller somatic sensory axons. And they will be lightly myelinated fibers of intermediate diameter with conduction velocities of somewhere between 3 and 15 meters per second. They're typically going to be controlling things like visceral organs. The group C fibers, they're going to be made up of mostly smaller diameter unmyelinated fibers with conduction velocities of somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 meter per second. Now, obviously, many chemicals and physical factors can influence conduction impulses. Such things as alcohol, sedatives that a dentist may give you can affect the electrical event. Prolonged cold and prolonged pressure can interrupt blood flow to given areas. This is sensation you think of when your fingers are numb or when you get up after you've sat for a while and your leg has fell asleep. Y'all be safe. See you later.